Good afternoon, and welcome to this closing event for the Agents of Change first round of specialized trainings. My name is Fabio González, and I'm the ECPAT International team. Today we'll be having a really interesting dialogue. You usually hear from us at the civil society talking about the problem of sexual exploitation, 2 years, and about how several cases we have each day. But today we have a different proposal for you. We would like to introduce you to persons that are right now in the front line of the fight against sexual exploitation. And this is what the Agents of Change is all about. First, I would like to introduce the persons joining me today. Dr. Dorothea Czarnecki from ECPAT International, Mr. Ernst retired special agent from the FBI in the US, Mr. Michael Johnson, retired police detective, also from the US, Ms. Erika Aguirre from the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, and Ms. Sharmin Subrina from Bangladesh, from the civil society and also a member of the ECPAT network. Welcome everyone, and thank you very much for joining us today. Without further ado, I'll hand it over to Dr. Dorothea Czarnecki to give an opening remark on behalf of ECPAT International. Please.
Thank you very much, Fabio. Welcome everyone also from my side. I'm Dorothea and I'm the Deputy Executive Director of Programs at ECPAT International. It's a huge pleasure to have this closing event today, basically, because we as ECPAT, as the leading global network of civil society organizations working towards the eradication and towards ending sexual exploitation of children around the world, have come into gain a lot of knowledge through 30 years of existence that we would like to share with you how we put this knowledge into practice today. And the knowledge of the specific issues that we're tackling today is on the problems of access to justice for children. And I would like to present you only very briefly with 3 major things that we see are valid around the world in all systems. First is that the identification is the first key and the first step towards a proper support and protection of children as victims of sexual exploitation. So what you don't see, you will also not believe that it exists. So if frontline professionals and frontline workers don't believe that such a thing as child trafficking exists in their countries, in their cities, around them actually, they will not have this insight to identify children and bring them to the next level of the child protection system. The second part is, or the second point that we see as very critical, is that actually very few children really access the justice systems. This is due to many factors like social tolerance towards sexual exploitation of children, the fear of perpetrators, sometimes all the lack of proactive investigations of the law enforcement sometimes. And the third thing is that when children actually, as victims of sexual exploitation through trafficking or other forms, actually enter the justice system, they have to relive their mostly traumatic experiences. Because just imagine you sit in a room with someone who you don't know and you have to tell them your worst sexual experience, which sometimes for children is of course also the first sexual experience. And you have to repeat this story all over again. You have to tell this to social workers, to law enforcement officers, to medical staff taking the forensics, to a prosecutor. You are being brought into a courthouse, a courtroom where everything looks very strange and very unfamiliar to you in this big room with so many other people around you, and you have to repeat your story all over again. So you can imagine this is very traumatic for children. So, and also connected to this, not only that this topic itself is already like a really a difficult task for children and also for the support systems, but of course the COVID-19 situation made everything a bit more challenging, because also for the frontline professionals and the support system, they faced a lot of limitations and a lot of disruptions through the COVID crisis, like also working from home, no home visits to vulnerable children anymore, how do you manage sensitive content, for instance, when it comes to online exploitation, when you're supposed to work from home and you cannot do this? And the case management was also more complicated. So many things that we saw, and saw the need also all over our member organizations, that we saw the need for change this. And through the collective impact that our network of 122 organizations has, we came up with a really good, solid program, even in COVID times. And I would like to hand over back to Fabio to tell you what the solutions for all those challenges were.
Thank you very much, Dorothea. Well, you've heard so much about the agents of change, and you saw it down in the script. But what is agents of change? This problem I was describing is definitely something really hard to address, because basically the justice and the protection systems all around, is not only in one country or in one, all the systems all around the world were not designed to take into the needs of the victims, the needs and the special vulnerabilities in the case of children, for instance. So, as Dorothea was mentioning, a child victim has to go over and over again to relive their traumatic experience. And there are models to address that. And I would like to highlight, for instance, the Child Advocacy Center model created in the United States, or the Barnhouse model created in Europe, where a single approach for all professionals coming to one session, into one single approach, to reduce the amount, the times the victim has to be exposed to relive their experience during the process of accessing justice. We had a really interesting project, and thank you very much to the kind support. Friends for Children International, our member in the Netherlands, was our supporter for this project, funded by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Netherlands. When we started this project last year, we had a first round consultations with frontline workers. This is basically people working in law enforcement, in the judiciary, in child protection, in managers, society organizations, trying to address that. What can we do about it? Of course, the Advocacy Center and the Barnhouse are the successful experiences to follow. Unfortunately, what they made us realize is this is not always applicable to all the countries as the model, because the legal process often requires for the child to be constantly exposed in different moments. Both the protection and the legal system are not necessarily aligned in terms of timing. But what we did find is that it does make a difference when the professionals in the front have an awareness on the importance of working from a multidisciplinary approach. This is the first step to become an agent of change. There are many we have to do after this. There are legal reforms, there are structural changes that need to take place in all the countries. But it's with the people in the front lines working against sexual exploitation of children, and this is why we thought the idea of agents of change. So agents of change goes beyond training. The training is an excuse to empower and to provide all the necessary knowledge, and I will leave it to our speakers to explain later what this specialized training included. But after this training has concluded, and this is the aftermath of this project, what we would like to create is a network of frontline professionals aware of the need of incorporating child victim-centered approach in the processes, which is basically placing in the center. We were lucky enough to find partners all around the world. I would like to highlight the kind support of the Down to Zero Alliance, which is a network of civil society organizations working to end sexual exploitation of children all around the world, where ECPAT is part of, and also the kind support of the United Nations on Drugs and Crime. And I would like to highlight why join efforts with the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, and I will hand it over to Mrs. Erika Aguirre from UNODC to explain further later. The beginning of this year, UNODC released the Global Trafficking Report, which is available in the United Nations on Drugs and Crime webpage. The first report in years. They included information also on how the trafficking in persons in general was happening during COVID times, because it basically changed the playground. One of the main highlights is that the Central America and Mexico region has one of the highest prevalences of trafficking of children purposes. So we partnered with the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime to involve the regional coalition of authorities working from law enforcement and migration authorities against trafficking in persons to join the ECPAT of Change trainings and join the aftermath of this. We were lucky to reach two regions. We worked in Latin America, not only in Central America and Mexico, but also in Asia. We work in Southeast Asia and South Asia. It was a wonderful experience involving 16 countries and 172 participants from all around the world who were able to share their experiences, their feelings while they were learning, and also by the end of to come with a plan on how they were going to implement all the things they learned. I would like the key actors of this process to talk about it. So I would like to introduce again Mr. Ernst Wyand. As I mentioned in the beginning, Mr. Wyand is a former supervising special FBI agent. He was the lead instructor for one of those specialized trainings. Mr. Wyand, good afternoon. You led the team of instructors of the agents round of specialized trainings we just finalized. What change can a professional bring to his job or his or her job after receiving over 25 hours of specialized training?
Well, Fabio, first, thanks so much. And we're honored, certainly me personally and members of the Seven Shores team, to be part of this new effort in creating agents of change to affect the way child abuse and exploitation and human trafficking is addressed in so many countries. I think the answer to that in terms of what change we'll see is really depending on the individual, that individual agent of change who attended the 25 hours of training. To give everyone who's listening kind of an idea of what the training looked like, it really was over 20 hours in 4 sessions, meeting with individuals and really talking about these basic or foundational requisite skills needed to investigate and prosecute child abuse and exploitation in human trafficking with child victims in a victim-centered, trauma-informed, and culturally appropriate way. Each day, the focus was on these fundamental tasks that could be implemented relatively quickly without a whole lot of additional resources in order to impact and make for positive, sustainable change immediately in the country, regardless, again, of circumstances. When it comes down to the individuals who attended the training, I think ultimately we're going to see change in a lot of different ways. And one of the things I think that was really exciting about the training was on day 4 of the training, we allotted a certain amount of time at the end for each agent of change to enter into the chat specific steps that they were going to take to affect positive change in their countries. Our agents of change came from a variety of disciplines. We had law enforcement officers, we had prosecutors, we had social service workers, child advocates, members of civil society organizations, and others, all with very different views on things, but all who kind of engaged in this training and willing to start to work as a team in order to make things better in their countries. So I think ultimately what the change is going to look like, we're going to see changes with some individuals that just might be changing the way that they do business, different techniques or methods that maybe they learned during the 20 hours of trainings. Others may be developing multidisciplinary teams in order to address child abuse and exploitation. Others may be, those working in teams may be working in ways to improve those teams and using some of the methods that we talked about. Others may seek change through legislative change, through, again, the way that they're working with victims in a variety of ways. And it may be change that they're trying to change cultures or the cultural shift that's needed in many countries in order to address the problem effectively. So ultimately, there's lots of different things, lots of potential outcomes, but I'm sure that our agents of change, we talk about this being a closing, but I think it's really the beginning for the agents of change, all of whom had indicated that they're going right out there and going to do specific things in order to affect positive change immediately in their countries. So thank you very much, Fabio.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ryan. I would like to introduce again Michael Johnson. As I mentioned before, he's from the US and he's a former police detective. Mr. Johnson, thank you very much for joining us. I would like to ask you, we have talked before about the victim approach. This sounds like a very term. What does it mean and why is this important?
The victim-centered approach, I guess the best way to explain it is from each of the disciplines' standpoint, all of them created their agencies to address child victimization, exploitation, trafficking in their own way, in a singular way. The victim-centered approach seeks to address the needs of the victim instead of having the child go from one office to another office to another office to another office throughout the week. I often use the example of how many of us have the ability in a given work week to go to 5 to 7 or 8 different appointments without it negatively impacting our work, or if we're, have children at home. The other thing that's really important, and I hope and I look forward to all of our jurisdictions and our countries experiencing this in a very local way, is I don't know how many people out there have been in a police department. I hope nobody has, but if you've ever been to a police department, well, there are criminals there, and there are people there that are in emergency situations, and there are people crying and they're upset, and people having arguments, and it's just not a place where a family should bring a child or youth or teen that's experienced abuse. And wouldn't it be a great idea if all of those disciplines, law enforcement, child protective services, the prosecution, the advocates, the therapists, and even to a degree, the forensic medical professionals, all agreed on one location, a child and family friendly location? It could be anything from an office or to an actual house, which is the model in the U.S. For a children's advocacy center, but a singular place where the child victim can go, and all of those different disciplines and more all agree to meet there to have the child interviewed by one person. Dorothea did a great job, as well as you, Fabio, of giving people a little glimpse of what the experience of for a child to make a statement about being abused to somebody they believe is going to do something about it is heroic. And it requires the best efforts we can have. And imagine all of those disciplines agreeing to work together so that that child, when they make that statement, can go and be interviewed by a professional. We use the term a forensic interviewer, somebody specifically trained to not only talk to a child in a developmentally sensitive manner. I mean, when we talk to a 4-year-old, if we remember our own children, it's different than an 8-year-old, it's different than a 12-year-old, and it's different than a 16-year-old. But understands those different ways that you talk to children, but more specifically to find out what happened to them, the details of their sexual victimization, the who did it, where it happened, what did it, those very questions that go to a law enforcement investigation. And for social services, what are the support systems that exist in the home, if there are any? And if there aren't, meeting those needs. And for the prosecutor to get the information that he or she needs to bring this individual to justice. And for the advocate to ensure that all of these child and families' needs are being met in the community. And for the therapist who's meeting with the child, what good is justice and an arrest and a prosecution if the child is still suffering from the experiences of their abuse, their exploitation, or their trafficking? And then, of course, a forensic medical professional whose job it is to diagnose and treat and address what is happening with the child. So all of those different disciplines and more, it's an agreement to meet, to put that child first. If you can imagine putting the child in the center and all these disciplines are around them, agreeing to coordinate and collaborate their investigation in a child and family friendly structure. We know it works. It's a best practice, and it's the least we can do for these children who, as I said, have already done the hard work, and that is to come forward to let us adults know what's happening to them.
Thank you very much, Mr. Johnson. Thank you, Correspondents Club, for hosting this event. I would like to highlight that this event is being followed all around the world, not only in Thailand. Ourselves here present are based all around the world, in Thailand, in Bangladesh, in the West Coast and the north of the US. Me, myself, I'm based in Colombia. Ms. Aguirre is based in Central America and El Salvador. So thank you very much for your interest in here. To everyone, members of the media and other participants who would like to ask questions to the panelists, you can write them down in the live stream comment section. Mr. Johnson, as a follow-up question, it's really, I think it's really hard to avoid for civilians and people not involved in the work of law enforcement to ask questions on your daily work. Experience as a detective, what makes it so difficult for police to deal with child victims?
You know, Fabio, I'm going to be perfectly honest with you and go right to the core. It's emotional. It's hard. Most of us have children of our own, and I'm not going to not tell the truth and say that, you know, I can go to work every day and then come home and not think about what I've just worked on. You know, any given police detective is investigating a murdered child, a child who has been shaken or injured, a 3 or 4-year-old that's being sexually assaulted, penetrated by their father or older brother, a child sex ring where a man or organized crime has organized bringing children in so that other men, sometimes 10, 15, or 20, can sexually assault them. And on and on and on. And when we go into law enforcement, we're not familiar with these experiences. We're used to the idea of investigating robberies and stolen vehicles and motor vehicle accidents and arresting people for getting into fights and being drunk. And then you present us with a situation where a child victim, 5 or 6 years of age, who may look just like our son, who may look just like our daughter, has experienced this incredible experience and is possibly injured physically, and we have to respond to it. There is no training that prepares one for that. Many of us actually can't do it. I'll be perfectly honest with you. I've been training for a number of years, and I have police officers all the time tell me that they could not do this work. So it's a very special type of individual that does this work, that's willing to go through the training necessary to be effective in this work, because it's not advocacy that we're doing. We're actually having to find out the details of what happened to this child victim and conduct an investigation by crime scene evaluation, forensic medical evaluation, interviewing witnesses. And many times those cases lead to other cases where the perpetrator is perpetrating or offending against other children. So this can be very strenuous work, and very rarely, as a matter of fact, I don't know of anyone who starts their career doing this and ends their career doing this in a direct contact type of way. And that in and of itself should tell you about the emotional toll and strain that it takes on the investigator. Now, it's uncomfortable talking about that because what we want to talk about is being victim-centered and what have you. But thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to give you a glimpse, if you will, behind the curtain of what it's like to investigate these types of offenses. It's just not your normal type of police work.
Thank you very much. And I would like to take the opportunity to the frontline workers for the work you do. As you mentioned earlier, training that prepares the frontline workers for the things they have to see and for all the trauma, all the pain they have to see. So thank you very much to all the people who work front lines, the fight against exploitation of children. I would like to get back to Mr. Wayan. You had a really interesting experience when you were working with the FBI, not only in the US, but also I know you even had specific experience in Southeast Asia, providing support to law enforcement in there. How was your experience from the US useful for law enforcement in other regions?
Excuse me. Well, thanks so much, Fabio, for the question. I think one, certainly with the experience that I've had, that we collectively as a team had in the United States, to just kind of share with you what the team looked like, the training team. We had individuals with over 100 years of experience working in a multidisciplinary team environment, which means a number of things. It means we've learned a lot. It means we've failed a lot over that period of time, and we've learned a tremendous amount. We've seen good teams, we've seen bad teams. And as a training group, we came together and really wanted to focus in on what those universal principles were that could be applied anywhere, that were universally accepted as best practices when we look at victim-centered and trauma-informed and culturally appropriate services that we're providing to victims in our cases. So we came from that place, and I think with my experience in the U.S., with my experience in working in Thailand and working to develop multidisciplinary teams in Thailand, and working with the TICAC at the very beginning as it was being formed in Thailand, was really taking those experiences from the U.S., taking at that point 20 years of working with functioning multidisciplinary teams, with teams that didn't function so well, understanding the complicated dynamics that come with working in a team environment, being effective, things that make a team fail. We were able to share those things and take our experiences of failure in many cases in order to avoid that when I was working in Southeast Asia. And certainly that was a focus during the training with the Agents of Change training, really talking about those best practices. You know, when we talked about multidisciplinary teams, we talked about composition, team members, common responsibilities among team members, things that may be potential conflict items that may cause the team to falter or fail. We talked about communication and staffing and the very important conversations that needed to take place. And again, we emphasized throughout in the training of having the victim in the center, and always when we're staffing cases, talking about the protection and needs of the victim before we really get into a lot of the other details about the prosecution and the investigation. You know, understanding and continuing to keep the victim in the center of the process. But ultimately, my experience in the U.S., it translates very well. Again, but it's more about the failure over those years and finding what is universally applicable in using that. So hopefully that answers your question.
It definitely does. Thank you very much. I think beyond sharing failure, which is always we learn more from the failure, is that as we mentioned in the beginning, this is a worldwide problem. Not only the issues related to access to justice, but the way we address the sexual exploitation of children, both challenges in all the countries. So thank you very much for your answer. I would like to go to the other part of the group. And I say the other part of this, Mr. Wyan and Mr. The lead trainers in this round of specialized trainings. But we have the honor both Mrs. Erika Aguirre and Mrs. Arvin Sobrina, who were not only instrumental in the organ of this, but also were participants themselves. I would like to ask first, Mrs. Erika Aguirre, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us. I know it's very early for you. And also support of the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime to this project. As I mentioned in the beginning, the UNODC released this year Global Retrafficking in Persons, where the agency highlighted the high prevalence of trafficking of children for sexual purposes. Could you please elaborate on this report finding the regions of the world?
Muy buenos días a todos y todas. Por parte de la Oficina de las Naciones Unidas contra la Droga y el Delito, nos sentimos sumamente agradecidos por poder participar esta mañana. Y,
Good morning, everybody. We want to greet you from the Office of the UN for Drugs and Crime, and we want to also
mencionar algunas de los hallazgos que hemos encontrado, por ejemplo, y que en estas alianzas tan importantes que llevamos a cabo con ECPAT, por ejemplo, como agentes de cambio, podemos seguir identificando
some of the findings that we've had in association with ECPAT International and how these partnerships have been strategic. Amongst those findings, we can highlight the following.
Que las mujeres y los niños siguen siendo representados por su mayor número de victimización a nivel del mundo.
That women and children continue to be the top victims in these kind of crimes. The report of the UN
establece que el 50%
and crime establishes that 50% of victims
tienen un fin económico a la fecha.
Of human trafficking have a financial purpose.
Que los niños siguen siendo traficados con mayor cantidad que en otros años.
That 30% of children continue to be trafficked more than any other years. That human trafficking is with sexual exploitation, commercial purposes. And that's the top of the list to date.
El 50% es más o menos lo que reporta de explotación sexual comercial en razón del 80% que se establecía en 2006.
Currently, there's been an increase in the percentage of sexual exploitation for commercial purposes, and it's been now trying to be worked at another percentage.
Algunas de las personas condenadas por trata de personas es el 68% para hombres y el 38% de mujeres.
Those people that are being sentenced, about 68% are men and 32% are women.
57% son organizaciones del crimen organizado transnacional que se dedican exclusivamente a la trata de personas.
57% comes from transnational organized crime organizations that are dedicated to human trafficking.
El 18% son mafias pequeñas que se dedican no solamente a la trata de personas, sino a múltiples delitos de crimen organizado transnacional.
18% is committed by small mafia groups, which are not only dedicated to human trafficking, but other kinds of crime.
Y el 25% son redes desagregadas a nivel mundial que estamos viendo la explotación sexual comercial de niñas, niños y adolescentes.
And 25% are disaggregated networks that are operating worldwide that are dedicated to human trafficking of boys and girls for sexual purposes.
Dentro de los hallazgos que logramos identificar, por ejemplo, en este informe del 2020 que la Oficina de las Naciones Unidas contra la Droga y el Delito lleva a cabo con el apoyo de 148 países que están dando información referente a cómo van justamente con la identificación de las víctimas y con la persecución penal de los agentes de la ley, vemos justamente una alza significativa de una vulnerabilidad de los niños, niñas y adolescentes en razón de las TICs, ya que hemos identificado, por ejemplo, que muchos de los niños
that CIT technology has been playing a major role, and we've seen around 148 countries that have been reporting that this has been on the increase, and this has been highlighted as part of the 2020 report that we do on an annual basis as part of the UN Agency Against Drugs and Crime.
Muchos de los niños, niñas y adolescentes, por ejemplo, están siendo captadas por redes sociales en las cuales los padres muchas veces no logran tener un control.
Many of these children, boys, girls, and teenagers are being groomed through social media where parents have no control whatsoever.
En el informe anual, en el capítulo número 5, se destacan dos características o dos resultados, estrategias principales que utilizan los traficantes de personas.
In the annual report, in the 5th chapter, two strategies are highlighted that are being used by those organizations that are dedicated to human trafficking.
Uno de ellos es la casa, donde los traficantes se acercan prácticamente a las víctimas de una forma directa, sin ningún tipo de intermediario.
One of them are those houses where traffickers will approach victims in a direct manner with no kind of intermediary for sexual purposes.
Y la pesca, donde se establecen anuncios que se colocan en las líneas y los traficantes esperan a sus víctimas.
And then the fishing, where certain posts or announcements are published, whether they will expect boys or girls to bite the bait.
Cuando vemos diferentes tendencias que hemos identificado a lo largo del 2020 y de lo que viene en el 2021, vemos que el incremento a la explotación sexual comercial lastimosamente nos genera un hallazgo de decir que está en aumento.
When we look at numbers compared for 2020 and 2021, from what has already gone ahead in this year, we can see that all the numbers are on the rise, unfortunately.
Y que los aplicadores de la ley ahora no solamente tienen que enfrentarse con todo lo complicado que, tal cual lo decían nuestros expositores, es de atender a la víctima intentando no revictimizarla, sino más bien ahora también encontramos que cada agente tiene que estar capacitado en diferentes áreas, entre ellas la tecnología.
And added to that, law enforcement officials are facing the added challenge of having to make sure that they are looking after the victim, looking after their needs, and even added to that, all the dynamics of technology that are also increasingly used during the pandemic.
En ese sentido, creemos sumamente importante que todas las personas que trabajan en materia de atención a víctimas, las personas que están promoviendo las acciones penales y todos los agentes de aplicación de la ley puedan tener una visión general de cómo hacer los cambios institucionales, muchas veces con poco o cero recursos.
In that regard, we believe it's absolutely important that all of the stakeholders will carry out the institutional changes required to be able to obtain the best results from different perspectives, whether they are attorneys, whether they are prosecutors, or whether they are agents of law enforcement.
Los países con menos recursos son los que tienen mayor afluencia de personas que están requiriendo servicios sexuales de niños, niñas y adolescentes.
And this is in spite of the fact of the little resources available, especially in those countries where this is the reality, where there are little resources, then this is where, unfortunately, there is a higher traffic and presence of this situation.
Y estos son algunos de los principales cifras y de las principales hallazgos que nosotros queríamos recalcar en este pequeño espacio que tenemos, no sin antes decirles que nuestro informe está justamente para su consulta en nuestra página web.
And we wanted to just highlight some of these findings and numbers to your attention, no, without saying that this report is also available on our website for you to download and query.
Y mencionar además de que no solamente como parte de nuestras alianzas estratégicas con ECPAT, sino también con otras agencias, que estamos todos trabajando de una forma vinculada en contra de la explotación sexual de niños, niñas y adolescentes, pues nos sentimos muy contentos de que muchos de nuestros aplicadores de la ley ahora puedan ser agentes de cambio.
And not without saying that we are also very happy and proud to have those strategic relationships and alliances with ECPAT and other organizations that are helping us to bring about this change as part of the Angels of Change program, also making sure that we have a positive impact.
No sé, Fabio, si tenés alguna otra pregunta.
Fabio, did you have another question?
Definitely, I do. Thank you very much for this detailed outlining on the reports of on the findings of the report. For everyone watching, downloading UNODC webpage, which is unodc.org. I was reading the comments in the live, and definitely all these findings are a punch to the heart, as one of the participants is saying. So thank you very much for sharing. It's a big task, and it requires people working against it. Mrs. Aguirre, you have yourself became a certified agent of change. How do you think agents of change around the world can address better the situation you described?
Bueno, decir que trabajar justamente con víctimas, que trabajar directamente con ellas es ya un reto.
Well, in itself, working with victims is a challenge in itself.
Este reto nos lleva siempre a otros niveles.
And as one of the panelists was already saying, these challenges will take us to new levels.
Y creo que justamente esta capacitación nos generó un aprendizaje que teníamos muchísimo tiempo, personalmente tenía muchísimo tiempo de no tener, porque nos enfocamos mucho a hacer nuestra labor, a trabajar, a capacitar a los aplicadores de la ley.
And I believe that this training really provided me with learning and learning points that I was needing and wanting for many, many years, and allowed us to improve and know how we can collaborate as law enforcement entities.
Sin embargo, cuando no estamos sensibilizados nuevamente y cada vez en lo que está pasando, por ejemplo, en muchas de las capacitaciones, yo sentía como un golpe directo de decir, has olvidado justamente esta parte de las víctimas.
Nevertheless, as we heard experience after experience and how the instructors helped us bring this home, it really helped us raise the awareness and understand we are dealing with victims and their needs are imperative.
Y recibir la retroalimentación de las personas, por ejemplo, que trabajamos directamente todos los días, de personas que muchas veces por una protección personal y psicológica dicen, voy a bloquear parte de mis emociones para no vincularme con los casos. Me hablaban y decían, wow, Erika, o sea, esto realmente ha regresado mi instinto de saber por qué hago el trabajo que hago.
And it was wonderful to hear the feedback of those people that work with us day in, day out, to say, I've been blocking out my emotions. I've been desensitizing myself just to try and keep myself afloat in the work that I'm doing. But this course has really helped me understand that I'm working with real people and that I need to be aware of their needs.
Y se convierte no solamente en una parte esencial para hacer un cambio estratégico en cómo estamos viendo el delito o los delitos vinculados, sino también de cómo es el abordaje de las víctimas.
And it's a strategic change to know how we're dealing with those different crimes that are related to sexual exploitation and how we can keep maintaining victims right at the center of everything that we do.
Personalmente creo que recordó muchísimo el por qué realmente lo hago y cuál es el papel importante que tenemos que llevar, porque muchas veces las personas que estamos capacitando llega un momento que perdemos la realidad.
Personally, I think this has been a great reminder of why I do what I do